for making your way after lunch, and let's see, there are a few more people coming. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the third and last panel of the day. Another number of quite interesting papers and presentations that I personally look forward to. And the panel of the title is titled EU Civil Society Looking Beyond Europe or Being Eurocentric, right? So we particularly try to go here in the focus how, going beyond Europe, how may EU, NGOs, or CSOs, how are they linked up with the rest of the world? And so we have three really great papers from three interesting presenters here, so I'm just going to introduce you in the order that you sit here. On my left-hand side I have Fiacre Bienvenu. He's a graduate student in our PhD program at Florida International University. He was born in Rwanda and earned his BA in sociology and worked also with international organizations in the development field for 10 years, so he has a lot of practical experience to talk about. He has an MA in African diaspora studies from FIU. And he's particularly interested in post-conflict resolution and society interrelatedness in Africa. And particularly interested also in the intersection between civil society and the state in processes of democratization in post-genocide Rwanda. And I think your research will talk to some extent about that. Then we have in the middle Sarah Motes, Dr. Sarah Motes. She's an instructor in our department, in the Department of Politics and International Relations. Very glad she's here. She got her PhD from West Virginia University in 2014, and her research focuses on the transnational activities of domestic organized interests. So sort of the linkage between, I guess, domestic interest groups and the broader world. She focuses particularly on two distinct policy areas right now: reproductive policy and environmental policy. And maybe there's something in the paper about that as well. She's also our online guru, so she teaches a lot of online classes, and if we have any problems or issues, which we do have, she can provide us with the solutions, so very happy to have her. And then last but not least we have Dr. Chris Pallas. He's Assistant Professor of Conflict Management in the PhD program in International Conflict Management at Kennesaw State University. And so he has a dual appointment, and he holds a PhD in social policy from the LSE, the London School of Economics, and a Master in Science and Policy Studies from the University of Edinburgh. And prior to that, he spent 4 years working for a faith-based non-profit organization and also served as a US Peace Corps volunteer in Togo, West Africa. I guess that's where a lot of your experience and interest in Africa comes from. Dr. Pallas' research interests include civil society, global governance, and the democratization of international policy making. So with that being said, if you want to start, Jeffrey, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thiel. I apologize, I caught a cold and I was hoping to be better today, but actually it plummeted last night. But I will try to deliver my presentation the way I envisioned it before. But I ask you to bear with me for my weird voice now. So the title of my presentation today was slightly modified from what you have on the agenda. So I was tasked to center my talk around the EU's idea of exploitation of civil society in Africa and its incidence on democracy. So it's a talk which has a lot to do with my current ongoing dissertation, my research, and it's more a theoretically informed reflection more than it is actually an empirically supported discussion. So it's an ongoing, and it's not very well structured as if it was a study conducted that I will be presenting findings from. Thinking in terms of EU-Africa relations via the medium of civil society, and perhaps the best way for me to frame this discussion is to start by making a connection between the two poles of civil society. On one hand, we have the grassroots civil society, on the one hand, which is and which conveys a way of living and self-organizing at community level in different parts of the world, and a global civil society, or the global dimension of civil society on the other hand, which is really stems from the liberal school of thought in the ways they tackle bigger questions pertaining to global peace or global security. So it's a juxtaposition between these two poles that I will be interested in the context of Africa and specifically in Rwanda. So perhaps I'll begin really talking about how the discussion is framed when we think about civil society and its global dimension from a liberal perspective. So liberals have traditionally had a strong faith in civil society and are optimistic about a change in our complex social, political, and economic world. So this hope has grown even wider with the advent of modernization in NGOs. They believe that proliferation of NGOs widen the scope of human contact and link domestic civil society to global governance. In the same vein, multinational corporations and cross-national organizations are believed to thicken transnational interaction. That is why the role of NGOs is more emphasized by liberals than their realist counterparts who emphasize the role of states and balance of power. NGOs for liberals are lower cost ways of solving differences as opposed to other costly options such as war or balance of power. The pro-NGO views hold that cooperation, which can only be attainable through interaction, facilitates mutual benefits between actors. It's a non-zero-sum game, but also contributes to the provision of collective goods or common goals such as clean air, global security, health, and more, which actors can achieve only together or not at all without harming others. These benefits constitute a collective security in the sense that their consumption by one actor does not diminish the supply available to another, as in breathing by one person does not diminish the air available for another person, or prevention of global warming, which has to be accomplished for all countries. Or for none. So liberals believe that this principle applies to wealth as well as other bigger questions, except that unlike for clean air, wealth does not exist in infinite supply. So how do EU-Africa relations fit into this narrative? I would like here to provide some facts and some statistics on what the EU has been doing about civil society in Africa. So here we have, there's the EU's cooperation with the African, Caribbean, and Pacific group, which was created in 1975 in the Lomé, and came to be known as the Lomé Convention in Togo, and then was updated in 2000 in the Cotonou Agreement in Benin. And that agreement mandated that African states who would receive EU direct aid to national budget had to allocate a certain percentage of funding to local civil society organizations as part of this process of allowing a participatory process, policy-making process. So there are 48 states of sub-Saharan Africa which are part of the Cotonou Agreement. In the northern part of Africa, or the Arab part of Africa, so there are 5 countries, so the Maghreb, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, and Morocco, and Tunisia. They also benefit in a way or in another this partnership with EU ACP agreement, but also they benefit by participating in the Mediterranean Union, in which EU is also substantively involved. So there is also the EU-South Africa relations, which are governed by the Trade, Development and Cooperation Agreement, which date in 1999. And then another additional way EU has been partnering with Africa, and which can be really a consequence of perhaps the failure or ineffective way that the previous approaches to EU-Africa relations have worked, is that since recently since in the past 80 years, EU has channeled about $6 billion US, which is 5 billion euro of aid through just civil society organizations. So that's pretty a colossal amount of money, and which shows how heavily EU is interested in civil society organizations in Africa. There's also the Lisbon Summit in 2007, in which 54 African countries adopt the Joint Africa-EU Strategy, or GAS, with the goal of moving beyond development, but also moving beyond institutions and beyond Africa, jointly addressing the global common challenges, such as climate change, peace and security, and taking more interest in other elements which are geared toward building or empowering individuals, for example, promoting mobility and employment, science, ICT, space applications, and human rights and governance and other issues. So the EU's narrative, as you can see, and its doctrine on civil society has been and remains anchored on the liberal faith that civil society organizations are, in the words of Andries Piebalgs, who's the Commissioner for Development in EU, the vital part of any democratic system. And since recently, EU has begun to view civil society as a prevalent tool in its foreign relations, especially in its engagement with Africa. So the EU-Africa relations from the EU side are envisioned from the perspective whereby civil society will become not only a crucial element of local governance, but also as a convenient medium via which to assert influence and foster enduring partnership for cooperation on issues of trade, security, terrorism, and more. So various internal debates within the EU, the policy-making intellectual communities, there's a view that civil society organizations are central and strategic actors in the process of understanding and predicting events such as the Arab Spring, the citizens' boom in Burkina Faso, and the Enough is Enough movement in Senegal. But also, there's a sense that civil society organizations are viewed as a medium for fostering long-term and mutually beneficial relations between Europe and Africa. But amidst this effort lingers the question of how will the EU's new approach to civil society circumvent the serious challenges rooted in rigid social norms and political realities in Africa. After all, the EU's model of civil society a priori is and feeds into the quintessential liberal argument, which is premised on the faith in a one free world that we've been at the quest for since the 90s. And if democracy, be it at local or global levels, as a function of pluralism and a vibrant civil society, holds to be a true formula, then we can legitimately ask, why hasn't the 3-decade-old debate not closed yet? So we've been working and interested in these questions for so long. And what's new that this new approach is going to change in terms of bringing about democracy in the continent. At the fall of the Soviet Union, a myriad of tools were deployed toward making democracy work. But rather than closing the debate, the ubiquity of democratic instruments has added even more questions. So the democratic game since the third wave that swept through the continent in the 90s has never been more creative. Out of the 54 nations, fewer than fingers of a hand are recognized as true democracies outside the continent. In spite of democratic norms and reforms, modes of governing and ordering African societies have rarely moved away from the status quo. But that too leads to another question. Why does civil society behave differently in Africa and the West? Why do we have two different ways of behavioral systems of civil society in Africa and the West? To me, understanding the synthesis between civil society and democracy in Africa calls for a shift in approach that requires a transposition of normativity on traditionalism. The examination of civil society and its utility for democratization needs to begin from inside. That is because the way complexities surrounding civil society in Africa unfolds belies a simple connection between civil society and democracy. There's a need to gauge civil society not just against the international/normative standards, but against the domestic environment too. That means we can be interested in assessing factors of acceptance and resistance of these ideals, liberal ideals of civil society in Africa. And eventually what obstructs them and what enables them, what